Today's critique focuses on the language of high-functioning depression, a script that redefines the modern understanding of depressive disorders by examining the hidden internal suffering of outwardly successful individuals. It's a beautifully empathetic, clinically insightful piece, but to maximize its impact, we need to jump right in. The emotional resonance of the script is severely disrupted by the inclusion of incongruous external audio fragments and disjointed closing dialogue.
Yeah, that disruption is it's the core issue with the framing here, because the author goes to such great lengths to establish this incredibly intimate, deeply poetic tone right out of the gate.
Right.
Reading it feels like someone speaking directly to you in a quiet room. It has that late-night, letter-to-the-listener atmosphere.
Yeah, it's very raw.
Exactly. But then, right as you're getting pulled into these profound psychological insights, the spell is broken. We suddenly get these random song lyrics dropped into the text.
Oh, the lyrics.
Right? Lines like, "Oh, the devil makes a sail," or "Love is like a flame." I mean, it feels like someone playing a kazoo during a eulogy.
A kazoo during a eulogy? That is exactly what it feels like. And it completely derails the reader's focus.
Completely.
You're asking the audience to sit with very heavy, very vulnerable truths about their own mental state. And then you distract them with the pop music reference.
Yeah.
But honestly, the lyrics aren't even the most distracting. The most jarring moment hits right at the very end of the piece.
Oh, the epilogue?
Yes, the author writes this stunning, emotionally resonant section called Epilogue, a letter to the glass achiever. It's gorgeous. It should be the mic drop. But instead of ending there, the text abruptly pivots into this bizarre, almost surreal closing dialogue. Suddenly we're reading about artificial intelligence, Instagram Reels, and a man doing flips with 6 fingers.
Which is just, I understand the temptation to do that. I really do. Sometimes when a writer has just delivered something incredibly raw, they get uncomfortable with the silence that follows.
Right. They want to diffuse the tension.
Exactly. So they use humor or surrealism or pop culture. They try to lighten the mood. But in doing so, they violently pull the audience out of the narrative. You really have to trust the emotional weight of your own work.
So how do they fix it?
The best suggestion here is to excise these unintegrated multimedia fragments to maintain a singular, focused narrative voice. Or, if they absolutely must remain, explicitly frame them as stylistic metaphors.
I'd argue for just cutting them. Like a concrete example. Remove the entire closing dialogue about the guy's flips and the AI. Let that powerful letter to the glass achiever stand as the final lingering thought.
I completely agree.
And for the lyrical drops in the middle, you could cut those or just replace them with brief, seamless musical scoring cues that don't introduce distracting vocals.
Right, because if they want an auditory experience, instrumental cues elevate the emotion without bringing in all the cultural baggage of a recognized song.
Yeah, or I guess they could weave the lyrics in as spoken word thematic quotes, but only if they actually match the surrounding text. The point is, protect the tone.
Absolutely. Protect the tone.
Which actually brings us to the structure, because the pacing of the 8 characteristics begins to feel like a relentless catalog rather than a narrative progression, risking audience fatigue.
Yeah, this is a classic structural bottleneck. The core of the material is built on 8 brilliant characteristics, from the broken reward loop to the seduction of the precipice, and each concept is heavy.
Very heavy.
But presenting 8 dense, psychologically heavy concepts consecutively without narrative breathers makes the middle section structurally overwhelming. It's just difficult to digest.
It's a massive cognitive load. When you read about mental health, the structure mimics your own psychological endurance. If you get hit with profound realization after profound realization without a pause, you just glaze over.
You do. The sheer weight works against the impact.
So the suggestion here is to group the 8 characteristics into broader thematic chapters to create a more digestible, undulating rhythm that guides the listener through stages of the condition.
I love that. Turning a list into a journey.
Exactly. For example, you could organize the points into 3 distinct acts.
Okay, walk me through that.
So, Act 1, the internal state. This covers the profound disconnect, the nihilism engine, and the perpetual fog. The invisible stuff.
Makes sense.
Then Act 2, the external mask. This is where you put the socially acceptable addictions, the feeling of being alone in the crowd, and the inner antagonist.
The outward perfectionism.
Right? And then Act 3, the breaking point. This is where you house the abandoned garden and the risk-taking behavior.
The seduction of the precipice.
Yes, by structuring it that way, you aren't just reading a check, you're telling the story of how the condition evolved.
And as a concrete example of how to link those acts, you'd need to insert a brief transitional sentence between these blocks, right?
Yes, absolutely. Give the listener a moment to breathe. Something simple like, once the internal state is altered, the individual must survive the external world. Thus, the mask is created.
Right. Just a tiny bridge to reset the brain before diving into the next heavy concept.
Exact.
Pacing is everything. And speaking of narrative flow, let's look at what happens after those symptoms are laid out.
Right.
Because the transition from the deeply intimate exploration of symptoms to the clinical discussion of recovery feels somewhat abrupt and misses an opportunity for narrative cohesion.
Yes, this really stood out. The script spends the vast majority of its time beautifully detailing the problem, using these evocative, poetic metaphors.
The nihilism engine.
The abandoned garden.
The precipice.
Stunning language. Yet when it pivots to the solutions, it suddenly adopts dry, clinical terminology.
CBT, ACT, SSRIs.
Right, it drops the rich thematic language it spent so much time building. It feels like the author took off a poet's hat and put on a doctor's coat.
I see writers do this a lot with mental health topics. They feel this imposter syndrome, like they need to prove they've done the academic research, so they fall back on medical textbook language.
But you've already won the reader's trust with your empathy.
Exactly. You don't need to sound like a textbook. So the suggestion is to thread the rich, metaphorical language used to describe the condition directly into the section detailing the paths toward recovery.
Right. We aren't saying to remove the clinical terms. Evidence-based tools are vital, but harmonize them with the poetic intent.
What does that look like practically?
As a concrete example, when discussing cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, explicitly link it back to defeating the inner antagonist.
Oh, I like that. So instead of just saying CBT addresses cognitive distortions, you say it provides the tools to cross-examine and defeat the inner antagonist.
Exactly. You anchor the science to the emotion. Or with behavioral activation, instead of just stating that it works directly on motivation, frame the clinical approach as replanting the abandoned garden, one small, unfelt seed at a time.
That is so much more powerful.
Right?
And these are just a few options. Like with ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, you could frame that as a method for safely stepping back from the precipice without needing the adrenaline of risk-taking.
Yes, it translates the clinical efficacy into the beautiful language the listener has already connected with.
It makes the recovery feel like a natural resolution to the story, not just a separate appendix.
Which keeps them emotionally engaged right up to the very end.
And the end is where the script pans out to look at society as a whole. But there's a hitch there too.
There is. The call for a cultural shift in how we perceive distress remains somewhat abstract and lacks immediate, practical application for the listener's everyday interactions.
Right. The text strongly urges the audience to expand what we treat as evidence of well-being and to ask, are you actually okay?
Which is a wonderful sentiment.
It is. But the weakness is that it misses the opportunity to provide the listener with specific, actionable counterscripts to use when dealing with high-achieving peers.
It tells the listener to look past the performance without showing them exactly how to navigate that conversation.
And it is notoriously difficult to confront someone with high-functioning depression because society heavily rewards their symptoms.
Hustle culture loves it.
Exactly. If someone's working 80 hours a week and carrying the team, just asking, are you okay, won't pierce their armor. They'll just say they're grinding.
So the suggestion here is to ground the cultural call to action in highly specific, relatable scenarios that demonstrate exactly how to pierce the mask of a high-functioning individual.
Give them the exact words.
Yes, concrete examples are crucial here. Provide a specific script for the workplace. If a colleague takes on a 70-hour work week, instead of praising their hustle, the text could suggest saying, I see how hard you're working and you're incredible at this, but I also want to make sure you're not running on empty.
That is incredibly practical. It acknowledges their competence, which they desperately need, while calling out the unsustainable behavior gently.
And you can do the same for personal relationships. Illustrate a scenario with a friend who volunteers for everything.
Right, the one who is always organizing group trips or helping people move.
Exact. Show how to gently intercept that socially acceptable addiction with a specific question about their hidden fatigue.
So instead of just saying, thanks for always being there, you could offer a script like, you are always the first to show up for everyone else.
but I wanted to check in on you. Is staying busy keeping you from feeling something else?
Perfect. Providing just a few of those word-for-word examples empowers the audience to enact the cultural shift the script is calling for.
It turns an abstract plea into practical reality.
It does. Let's briefly recap the main points we've covered today.
Let's do it.
First, to protect the deeply intimate tone, remove the jarring audio fragments and that bizarre AI-focused closing dialogue.
Second, organize the 8 characteristics into thematic chapters, like a 3-act structure, to create better pacing and prevent audience fatigue.
Third, thread the rich, poetic metaphors into the clinical recovery section for narrative cohesion.
And finally, provide concrete conversational scripts to ground the cultural call to action.
Implementing these structural and tonal alignments will elevate the piece from an insightful essay into a profoundly transformational, immersive experience.
We warmly invite you to revise your work based on these notes and submit it back in for further feedback.
We can't wait to see the next draft.